Hello again, everyone. This is Alex Toth, part 15 of my series. It's been basically me reading from his interviews, discussing these recollections of him by other artists, these commemorations, and I wanted to set the stage for showing his art. So that's where I'm at right now, if you're just tuning in. So here's a write-up by John Workman, one of the best letterers in comics ever. So he says, 1941 and all that. Why the graphic novel version of Steven Spielberg's 1979 film was not drawn by Alex Toth. So here we go, by John Workman. In the 1970s, In the 1970s, John Workman served for 2 years in DC Comics' production department before beginning a 7-year stint as the art director of Heavy Metal magazine. Since then, he has become known as an individualistic letterer. You can say that again. I clearly, underlined that when I read it first years ago. I mean, there's nobody like John Workman. He's so good. For dozens of different comic book titles, and has also worked as editor, writer, designer, penciler, inker. I didn't know that. Wow. Penciler, inker. Colorist for various comic features. I just know him as letterer. I'm shocked that I didn't even know that. Even though I read this years ago, I guess I must have forgotten. One of the greatest things that can happen to any human being is for that person to discover that he's been wrong. Now, I guess this is now John Workman. This is his write-up about Toth. One of the greatest things that can happen to any human being One of the greatest things that can happen to any human being is for that person to discover that he's been wrong. It's a liberating experience to find that a belief that one has held for minutes or for years has been incorrect. Acknowledging the error and setting aside the never true information is a big part of our ability to learn. Well put. Well put, Workman. In the late 1960s, I learned that I had been incredibly wrong about the work of Alex Toth. This is what I hear often from people about Alex Toth's work. When Jim Warren began publication of the god-awful titled magazines Creepy and Eerie, it's true, that's hilarious. They were so much more than just horror, creepy, monster stuff. They were great psychological stories. One where Toth did a guy who was dying. It was somewhat of a subtle horror story, but it wasn't horror per se. Really, really well done. And so on. Things done by Ditko as well, where he did The Grey Wash, which was beautiful. Toth did it himself in some of those stories. Okay, so I was delighted. He goes, when Jim Warren began publication of the god-awful titled magazines Creepy and Eerie in 1965, I was delighted. It was as if the glorious EC comics, right, back in the day, those horror, monster, suspense, thriller, crime comics, EC comics, of the previous decade, of which I possessed but a few, had returned in a format that allowed the beautifully rendered art of Frank Frazetta, Al Williamson, Roy Krenkel, Reed Crandall, George Evans, Wally Wood, Angelo Torres, Joe Orlando, and Gray Morrow, to be seen in a way that typical letterpress color comics printed on pulp paper could not match. I was, however, perturbed by the one lesser quality artist that Warren seemed determined to use, Alex Toth. That's hilarious. It's hilarious. That is so funny about the master. I was, however, perturbed by the one lesser quality artist that Warren seemed determined to use, Alex Toth. He didn't seem to belong among the greats who were the backbone of the creepy, eerie art staff. So I reluctantly read the Toth illustrated stories and found that, Although I liked those short tales, I'd have been happier if they'd been drawn by Wally Wood. It's hilarious. Hilarious. So he goes on. My ignorance of true quality took a sudden turn toward the light when comics collecting compatriot Dave Eaton let me borrow a copy of the 10th issue of Graphic Story magazine. Among the wondrous stuff to be found within its pages was the truly compelling interview with Alex Toth. Reading the thoughts of Toth opened my eyes to the realities of working as a comics writer-artist and reinforced my ideas of the incredible possibilities of the medium. The truths that Toth imparted to me by way of those words and pictures in GSM were just as important as the information that I'd gleaned from long-term studies of the work of Karl Barks, Will Eisner, Jack Cole, Jim Steranko, Harvey Kurtzman, Lind Ward, and so many others, and the obvious but necessary advice given to me in more direct ways by Stan Lee, Joe Kubert, Carl Stamwitz, and Basil Wolverton. I had sat down as an ignorant doofus, read 17 pages of material related to a form of expression that I loved, and come out of the experience as a much wiser person who understood a bit of the genius of Alex Toth. Now that's something. To experience that and then to openly admit it. And also, again, what changed him about, think about this. Keep bringing myself to this, but think about what I'm doing here. I'm presenting his ideas, people's ideas about him, the ideas that surround Alex Toth, right? What changed John Workman's attitude about Toth? Toth's words, his ideas, his thoughts about his art. And then you can appreciate the art far more than you would otherwise. Something about the way the man describes it, he makes sense, make logical sense why he does what he does. So when you see the art, again, it's only amplified, that greatness. It's only amplified to realize that, okay, this guy took this seriously. It was life and death for him. Quality, quality, quality. Always trying to do the best job he possibly could. And sometimes failing and, getting pissed off at himself. But that's a standard. You're not always going to meet that standard, but you can sure as hell try to. So he says, Workman continues, I pulled from my collection and eagerly reread such Toth illustrated comics as Dell's Rio Bravo, The Real McCoys, and Darby O'Gill, and Gold Key's Twilight Zone. I looked again at the Eclipso tales that Toth had drawn for DC's House of Secrets and the Atom Flash team-up from a 1964 issue of The Brave and the Bold, and at various science fiction, mystery, and romance comics that Toth had done for different publishers in the 1950s. I went back again with a lot more reverence to those great Warren stories that had been created by Toth and Archie Goodwin. I had found a new artistic hero. Archie Goodwin, he was editor at Marvel mainly, but man, he was a hell of a writer as well. He was really good, and he was close friends with Walt Simonson, and therefore, John Workman, who lettered Walt Simonson's Thor comics. That's where I was introduced to how good John Workman was, and as this magazine puts it, how individualistic he was. There was nobody like John Workman. He was great. He was like a really artistic letterer. A lot of impact. Perfect for Walt Simonson. The power that Simonson conveys in his art. And then he goes, 10 years passed. I had moved from my Washington State home to New York City and had become the art director of Heavy Metal magazine. Thanks to artist Walt Simonson and writer Archie Goodwin, HM's book division had recently had a huge success with the comics version of the movie Alien. Our follow-up was to be a comics version of the Steven Spielberg comedy 1941. You'll notice that I said version rather than adaptation in reference to both of those movies and the comics that they spawned. I've long believed that adapting a movie to comics form is an exercise in frustration. I hear you. It's much better if comics creators make use of the same source material that the filmmakers use, the script, and then boldly go off into the unique and wonderful unreal estate that can only be found in the land of comics. Well put. You could tell just by reading his words why he was such a great letterer. He's a thoughtful guy. And who better to make such a fantastic thing happen than Alex Toth? I took much delight in offering the unshackled freedom of doing something in comics form called 1941 to Toth. I wanted to make up for the people who'd looked over his shoulder for all of his career and told him what to do and how to do it. I knew his feelings about the overwritten scripting of the Zorro material he'd illustrated and how those unnecessary words had moved even those classic comics a bit toward the dull and pedestrian. Before the editors stopped him from doing so, Toth had stripped down the useless and redundant narrative elements and dialogue and turned the disparate pieces of writing and art into a beautifully functioning unit. Yeah, Toth adapted Zorro. I think it was a TV series, Disney, I believe. And he got very pissed off that the editors wouldn't allow him to strip away a lot of the dialogue. And so he, quote unquote, hacked it out. At the end, it's still better than most artists. It's so funny. Whatever he thinks is, drudgery, I guess, is great compared to others. I mean, look at this. Look at this. Beautiful. Okay. And, okay. Toth could do this, I knew, with 1941. He could take the not very good movie script as opposed to the downright brilliant one for Alien, give it enough of a read to know what the story was about, and then toss the useless mess out the window and sit down and draw and write a comic story that made the movie look anemic and sickly. We were in the center of a small window of opportunity between the time when comics editors were so in awe of the uncaring film companies, that they slavishly followed what they mistakenly believed were unspoken dictates, and the contemporary attitude that allows the filmmakers, marketing people to place a stranglehold on every aspect of the creation of ancillary material. We were doing comics versions of films at a time when we could ignore the studios and their underlings. We could play dumb and be smart and forget things and paint the film people into a time-constrained corner and flash an Iago smile and maybe lie a little, all as a way of politely telling those characters to buzz off. That's hilarious. The contempt he has for the studios and those behind it. I wanted to give Toth the opportunity to create 64 pages of comics material without any interference from outside sources. It clearly didn't happen, but man, imagine if that. Would have loved to have seen that. I wanted to let him know that whatever he wrote and drew and gave us, we would print. But I didn't want to talk to him directly. Though I'd come to admire his artistry, the series of stories that I'd heard from so many people about the often mean-spirited eccentricities of Toth made me want to maintain a respectful... I always almost laugh and smile when I read these about Toth. It's just, you always hear about it. I got none of it personally in my correspondence with him, but that's just, who knows. We had a great, starting point, I guess, with my graphic novel 201. But man, I've read some of his missives towards some artists. Yeah, and they are harsh. But again, as harsh as they are against himself. Toth made me want to, I'd heard from so many people about the often mean-spirited eccentricities of Toth made me want to maintain a respectful distance from the man himself. So I talked about my decision to make use of Toth with Julie Simmons Lynch, fellow heavy metal staffer and sometime co-conspirator in our attempts to keep Heavy Metal magazine alive and vital. We arrived at an agreement that made Julie H.M.'s contact with Toth. She would let him know of the total freedom that he would have in making a reality of our 1941. I love the fact that he's distinguishing their 1941 from the movie version, from the script. They want to make it their own, because comics are not film. No matter what you hear, they're not. They're static images that are very thoughtfully well considered prior to laying them down, at least for the best artists. They're not film. People sometimes try to make them film, it's just not the case. And, you hear like a joke, Asada, saying he wanted to graduate to films. There's an inherent contempt for his own industry, which is detestable. I mean, you love comics or you don't, and if you do, be part of it. If you don't really love them, if you want to go to movies, go to movies. Anyway, my 2 cents again. Toth's agreement to do the writing and art on 1941 made me incredibly happy. Okay, I guess he did decide until he didn't. He said he didn't want to do the coloring on the book, so I had Julie let him know that I would probably be doing that part of the job, and that it would follow any color indications that he made. I'd already done a color version of the black and white Toth-drawn question page as a sample for Julie and publisher Len Mogul to look at. They were both totally ignorant of Toth's work, and that page became their introduction to Alex Toth. It's a hell of a story, beautifully drawn, of Ditko's question, and the visual explanation of why I wanted so much to have him write and draw for heavy metal books. We announced at a New York Comics convention that Toth would be doing the writing and art on 1941. Man, imagine that audience. Must have been a big news. Then, as I later phrased it in a memo to the HM staff, quote, Alex Toth moved in mysterious ways, unquote. In a communication with Julie, Toth declared that he was dropping out of the project. The only reason that he gave involved a reference to the old military phrase, hurry up and wait. I couldn't understand why Toth had walked away from a project that gave him total freedom to create something that required only that he use the title and the bare bones of a less than stellar script and show them how it's done by converting the lackluster combination into a glorious comic book that could be enjoyed on its own. A mystery came into being. Why would a person do such a thing? 22 years passed. In a conversation with comic book artist John Cook, there's a magazine called Comic Book Artist, really good, I mentioned the mystery of Toth's walking away from the total freedom that every comics creator purported to want. In seeking to find an answer to that mystery, he went directly to Alex Toth. In a letter in the 15th issue of CBA, Toth cleared everything up by stating that he had been seriously unhappy with 1941's script. He couldn't remember whether it was the movie script or the script of the comics version. Since the comic script was to be written by Toth, the words that perturbed him had to have been from the original movie script. His reaction to those words paralleled my own. When I read the initial script, I felt that the movie had no chance to succeed unless Steven Spielberg possessed the sort of comedic timing that came naturally to Jack Benny. Subsequent rewritings made the mediocre script even worse. But none of this should have mattered. Exactly, because he was given carte blanche, right? Toth didn't have to slavishly follow the script. He needed only to give us something to print that used the settings and the time period and some of the characters from that lousy script. The intention was for him to do something in comics form under the title 1941 that would be so superior to the film version that people could eventually forget the movie and fondly remember Toth's comic book. What a great intention that Workman had. But words had failed us. Communication had faltered. Because of my somewhat cowardly inability to face the possibility that, and just think about this also. He's called himself out because he allowed someone else to deal with Toth instead of dealing with it directly because he was afraid that he would blow up at him. I mean, that's why people told me, are you sure you want to send your story to Toth? I mean, he could be nasty. I said, so what? Who gives a damn? Whatever the master says, I want to take in. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. You can't lose nerve when it comes to interacting with your heroes in any capacity. You can't. You lose out. You live a life of regret. And this seems what happened here with Workman. But words had failed us, communication had faltered because of my somewhat cowardly inability to face the possibility that one of my artistic heroes might turn out to be, in some messy human ways, a schmuck. I relied on an intermediary to pass on the news that Toth could create to his heart's content, and that we would print what he gave us. In some way, he never fully understood what he had been offered. Damn. This is tragic. Absolutely tragic. Because that was in his wheelhouse, right? 1941, an older era. That's what he would love to do. So not too long after that, the newest and greatest HM editor, Ted White, showed me a package that he'd gotten from Toth. It contained Xerox copies of the entirety of Bravo for Adventure. We loved it, and we were determined to run it in serial form in heavy metal, though it contained none of the usually required fantasy or science fictional elements. But Toth quickly pulled his submission back, and Bravo made its appearance in the U.S. in Jim Warren's Rook magazine. The reason there might have been money. HM's page rates were notoriously low. When we were working on the heavy metal theatrical movie, I suggested that Alex Toth would be a natural for some of the needed character design. Len Mogul, co-producer of the film, offered my suggestion to the people at the animation studios and was told that, though they all recognized Toth's genius, none of them was willing to put up with any direct involvement with the man. I mean, think about this. That's just part of life, right? You deal with it. You deal with it. Whatever attitude he might have, you take it in because his work is so worth it. So worth whatever kind of hassle you might have. They say truth hurts. Well, in a lot of ways, I guess that's how they saw Toth, right? That Toth hurt. He was a little too direct, honest, willing to make his claim, to state his opinions, to correct people, to tell them, here's a better way to do it, and so on and so on. Man, this is, it's tough to reread this because I remember being upset about it at the time. We missed out on Toth writing, drawing, inking, lettering, something that took place in 1941, a World War II comic book, graphic novel. When our 1941 appeared, it was brilliantly done by the young and wildly exuberant team of Rick Veitch and Steve Bissett. I think Bissett or Bissett, with additional contributions from John Totleben, Tom Yates, Erwin Hasen, who was Toth's friend, Steven Spielberg, Alan Asherman. I wonder what Spielberg did. Did he doodle anything out, or did he write? Alan Asherman, Julie Simmons Lynch, and me. The book was everything that I wanted, and it reached something of a mass audience and quickly did what the movie took a long time to accomplish. It made a profit. There's a very long article, maybe even a whole book, in the so funny that it hurts story of the making of the 1941 book. Alex Toth never wrote or drew anything for heavy metal. I wish that he had. Me too. And again, whatever the book ended up being, I've seen work from Rick Veitch and S.T. Bissett. Some good stuff, but, Alex Toth doing it, giving everything, carte blanche. Hey, this is yours. This is yours. Do with it whatever you want. So this next article is by the great Terry Austin. So basically you have the greatest, in my opinion, because again, people could argue, Toth was a great letterer, but I think John Workman was the greatest. I think he's still doing work as well. He's great. And then he got arguably the greatest inker in mainstream comics ever. Whoever he inked looked better than they ever did. Incredible. And he was a great cartoonist in his own right. I think he used to draw Popeye here and there and doodles. He had the portfolio in one of the, what was it? I forgot the actual. It was Marvel Fanfare. Marvel Fanfare. Terry Austin had he had a portfolio there, which was great. And then there's little recollections from other artists here, short ones. But next time I'm going to read this. And again, this is hilarious. Simply put, I hated Toth's art. That's what Terry Austin said. Hilarious. I don't know. There's something about that instantaneous recoiling that people had, because they're so used to certain ways, right? To Jack Kirby and John Buscema and others, and a lot of detailed work and so on. And they see his naked art like, ugh, hilarious. But clearly he loved Toth. He actually was able to ink Toth in a Batman Superman comic, which was great. And look at Toth's pencils and look at the inks. I mean, we're talking, he didn't change much, did he? Because he didn't have to. Alex Toth, inked by Terry Austin. Wow. I have a Green Lantern comic he did that Terry Austin inked, and also the Batman Superman story, which was totally fun. Yeah, this is part of the Green Lantern comic. At least a short story, I think. It was like half a comic that Terry Austin did. These are his Toth's postcards to Terry Austin. Terry Austin, man, he's so good, so good. The one thing I resented about Terry Austin years ago was whenever he was asked, what tool do you use to ink? He goes, it doesn't matter. Well, it mattered enough for him to say it doesn't matter, right? You know, I know what he means. At the same time, how does he get this kind of ink work done? And I believe it was a pen, or what do you call those? Not a dip pen, I guess. Like a calligraphy type thing, if I remember correctly. That was a great way that he made the shadows there, Terry Austin. That fine detail that he added, it was beautiful. I'm going to review a comic that he inked, the Fantastic Four versus the X-Men, that John Bogdanove drew, Chris Claremont wrote, and that Terry Austin inked. I don't know what it is about that comic. First of all, it's good, clearly. It's so good. I mean, John Bogdanove never looked better, ever. And he was a great artist, but he never looked better than there. And Ethan Van Sciver also has a soft spot for that comic, and I do as well. And he actually posted issue number 2's cover, where Wolverine is standing, Wolverine, the character, standing with his claws popped out, having killed Reed Richards and Reed Richards' son over his body, crying about it. And it was a haunting drawing and idea. Like, what the? He murdered Reed Richards, and his young son is crying over his body. Very powerful, but man, that entire story, and the way Claremont wrote Doom, Dr. Doom, was fantastic. And the Fantastic Four in general. I mean, he was a great writer. You know, he gets a lot of flack for overwriting and all that, and he did. Especially in the beginning, like with the Cochran, early X-Men, Uncanny X-Men. But I think as he started to get going with, you know, writer-artists like John Byrne, it was happening less and less. And that 20-year run, 30-year run, whatever he was doing, those are great comics. From Dave Cockrum to John Byrne, back to Dave Cockrum, to Paul Smith, to John Romita Jr. Who came after? Maybe Jim Lee at that point. It might have been, but there was a lot of different artists at that point. When John Romita Jr. left, I remember it was a lot of fill-in artists, Alan Davis and Rick Leonardi, and a lot of artists. And then Jim Lee made his way in, and he was great. Those early issues that Jim Lee drew were great. And then there was one issue drawn by Rob Liefeld, which Dan Green inked. And talk about saving someone. I mean, whatever those pencils were, and what it ended up being, two totally different things. You know, Dan Green was a great inker. Anyway, we're going to check this out next time. Thanks for being here as always. And if you can subscribe. I would appreciate it. And if you like this video, like it and spread the word. I want to grow my channel. And you can also check me out on Mondays, Comics Gay Kings. I'm there every week. And I'll be announcing my campaign for my CG Comicsgate version of Pigman. It'll be expanded bonus material with a new cover. And I want to basically introduce Pigman to a whole new audience. I think that'll be awesome. So again, like this if you like it. I would appreciate it. Until next time. This is Alex Toth, part 15. Thanks, everyone. Take care.